argued for a long time, in fact, since I wrote my book Signals in 2016, that this is a universal phenomenon. It's not just in the United States. But everyone thinks it's local, right? So everyone thinks Brexit was special, specific to the UK. It had nothing to do with anybody else. They think the polarization is special, specific to the US. And you go through every nation, they're all experiencing this same phenomena. So the question is, what's causing it? And we can make a list, but one of the things is something called the knowledge doubling curve, which was a term invented by Buckminster Fuller, the engineer who created the geodesic dome and was a great visionary. And he noticed that the volume of information that we have to process as humans is doubling on a very fast scale. So from the year 1900, it was doubling every quarter of a century, to 2020, when by his calculation, now confirmed by IBM, it's doubling every 12 hours. So literally, think about that, right? It's just mind blowing. So what happens is you can't keep up with the content anymore. And we've all had that feeling, I can't read fast enough. There's too much coming at me. So what you start to do is say, well, I won't read the thing. I'll just ask who gave it to me. So if I'm on the left and CNN gave it to me, then it must be true. If I'm on the right and Fox gave it to me, then it must be true. And this is what makes Marshall McLuhan predicted back in the 60s that this would happen. It would make us more tribal, because you can't discern, and it's too hard to make sense of each thing because you're not expert enough. So you just start moving into tribes. And I think this tribal element is universal. And that's the bigger issue. It's not just in the United States. It's in every country. We're splitting into these cohesive units that are more tribal in nature.
What role does the social media apparatus play in the profit motive of the social media apparatus, which is obviously founded on dopamine, amplification, right? Where you want to trigger strong emotions, and the strongest emotions are hate, frustration, these types of things. So to what extent is social media driving us into smaller and smaller tribal groups, where the Venn diagram of the overlap of the information gets further and further apart with almost no intersection? What role is that playing, and how do we walk that back, do you think?
Yeah, well, I do think it is playing a significant role in intensifying this issue. It's part of that speed phenomena again. And you're right. It's all about the money you make from the dopamine hits. That's the key. So you guys saw the social dilemma, where all these coders are like, wait a minute, I didn't mean to create something that was so bad for human beings. I was trying to optimize, but I've changed my mind. And
maybe not the coders, but they did hire Danny Kahneman with the explicit goal of trying to game the right, the amygdala, or
that's right. Yeah. Literally, how do we hijack the part of the human brain that doesn't have any choice but to do binary decision making, and to quickly lean into the defensive, the fearful. And so, yeah, naturally, this infects everything. And it's so pervasive and profound. So, yeah, how do we walk it back? Well, I think the two most interesting philosophers of our time are a guy called Daniel Schmachtenberger, which, of course, a great name for a philosopher, Daniel Schmachtenberger, and another one called John Vervaeke, who's a professor in Canada. The two of them are doing work on this question of sense making. How do we make sense of the world when there's so much information, when the nature of the problems is so huge? They're not even problems anymore, they're meta problems. Like it's at a completely different level. And they're trying each in their own way to answer this question of how do we disconnect the humans from the dopamine response function long enough for them to become educated about what is actually the issue and what are actually the facts, and what are new progressive ways of solving problems. And so In short, one of the things you always have to do is bring people together and, frankly, engage in a certain amount of forgiveness. And I do think that probably the single word answer to your question, what has to happen in order to have less conflict, less likely of the subthreshold conflict turning into something bigger, is a dialogue that ultimately is underpinned by forgiveness. And it's the hardest thing to do, but it's exactly what happened in the American Civil Rights Movement. It's exactly what happened when Gorbachev and Reagan met in person. There's an element of, I forgive you for all the misunderstandings. Can we just have a beer and have a chat? And I don't see enough of that happening in politics in any part of the world.
Kind of like a truth and reconciliation program that you've seen in post-apartheid South Africa. That's what
totally. It's the same thing. Like, as an example, people ask me, will it remain so contentious in American politics? Well, when my dad was in government, the head of the Republican Party and the head of Democratic Party were literally best friends. They had dinner every Friday night. They had an illegal poker game. They drank bourbon together, and they solved problems around that Friday night round of cards. These days, you literally are prohibited by law from having more than 3 people in a room discussing a live political issue unless there is a lawyer present, which means nobody's having dinner parties, nobody's playing poker together, nobody's drinking together. Not that I'm saying drinking is so good for you, but you know what I mean? Like, nobody's getting together nobody's getting together in a chilled out kind of way saying, hey, let's sort this out. Like, let's find a way forward. In fact, there's no place, there's no space for that conversation anymore. So how are you going to get there if they can't even go have a drink together and have a quiet, off the record conversation?